compound like a shroud. What am I to believe in when there is no one to whom I can tell my story, when there is no one who will believe it? I'd like to carry on. The primary character in this case, he does not have a name. He is incarcerated by an unknown group of militants, and he is put into an abandoned mental asylum, which still has its inmates in it. The story is one of survival, of how these people actually lasted through the many raids that took place in this asylum. I based this on facts that emerged from Kabul after the Soviet withdrawal, and I pay tribute to the people of Kabul who actually suffered more after the Soviet withdrawal than they did during the 9-year war between the CIA, Pakistan's military, which was their proxy army, and the Mujahideen. October 12th, 2002. Last night, when all I wanted was to sleep, to shut out the reality of what has come to pass, I found myself listening to Bulbul's story, which he told me with words he made up as he spoke. Words from his heart, words from the deep tunnel of his longing. I believe I have been here for almost a month now. Autumn is closing into winter. In these long days and nights, I have begun to understand this young man who speaks with his eyes and his hands, and a tongue which weaves terrible stories. This is Bulbul's story. My father was a farming man in a village far from here, beyond the shadow of these mountains. We had some land in that village, Shar Chashma, named for the water which sprang out of the earth and nourished the fields. We grew corn and sugarcane, and it was hard work trying to farm that land, but we had enough to eat, and we lived with dignity. It was after the war that things changed quickly for us. My father went into the fields one day to harvest the corn. The leaves on the trees were changing color, and the birds had started leaving for warmer places. I was so young then, maybe 6 or 7. I remember I had lost my front teeth that year, and my mother kissed me and told me that now there was a window in your mouth, so I could look out at life and become all that she had dreamed that I would be. She said that I was growing up to be a fine young man, strong enough to help my father on the land. I had a younger sister, Gulmina, just 3 or 4 then. Mina, we called her. It means love in my language. And Gul, it means flower. So she was the loved flower, or maybe she loved flowers, or I don't know. I don't even know where she is now, or if she is amongst the flowers for whom she was named. That day, when my father did not return from the field, my mother asked me to go and look for him. It was that time of day when the sky turns the color of a ripe peach and the sun begins to settle into its bed beyond the mountains. I had herded our sheep and the cow into the shed and was waiting impatiently for the meal my mother had cooked that day. Wild spinach. Yes, it was wild spinach. And bread made from our own corn. We even had some buttermilk from the cow who had calved the previous year. We lost that calf. I remember it. I named it Spojmai, full moon, because it was white and it lay curved into a circle besides its mother. Spojmai was born in the winter. We did not have enough fuel to keep her warm, so we brought her into our own room where my mother would hold her close to us when we slept. But the winter was very cold that year, made bitter still by the fact that the trees we chopped for kindling had been destroyed in the bombing, and those that survived had been felled by the government, which said that the rebels hid in these trees that gave us fruit and shade in the summer and warmth in the winter. So, Spojmai did not live out the winter. And then my father, he had that accident in the field. He said he never even saw it, the mine that blew off his legs. He had been picking heads of corn from their stalks to store for the winter. My mother would beat the kernels off the cob, and even my sister would help to gather them from the patch of earth outside our home. Often we would roast the stray kernels and have them as a snack. Sometimes my mother would add a bit of molasses the blood in my own veins started pumping, and I rushed towards him shouting, "Baba, Baba, what has happened?" He did not speak, and for a moment I thought he wasn't breathing. Then I bent down and I touched him. His skin was wet and cold, and he did not move. I thought he was dead, that my Baba had died, leaving me and my mother and Gulmina to harvest the rest of the corn, leaving us to fight the winter on our own. Baba opened his eyes after I held his head in my hands and cried, calling him over and over again, looking up at the darkening sky in case that was where he had gone. When he blinked and looked at me, I cried even louder, not knowing what was happening. I was so young, you see. I was just a small boy. Baba had stepped on a landmine which took his legs and one hand. He said he was worth nothing now, but my mother held him shamelessly and kissed his eyes and his forehead, and then offered her prayers to God to thank him for bringing back the father of her children. She wept, but then she wiped her tears and found a sheet to wrap the stumps left behind by the blast. There was so much blood that even the thirsty earth did not absorb it. It was like the blood of the sheep the elders of the village slaughtered for the festival of the sacrifice. But this was my father's blood, my own father, Sangin Khan, a man made of the hardest rock, broken into pieces like a crushed fruit.
I think we've got just about 5 minutes left, and I'd like to open the house to any questions. If you'd like to ask Faryal anything, or any comments.
If not, I'd just like to read the last passage. It's only one paragraph.
Which one? Here? Okay. All right. If you'd...
I need to wipe my face first. If there are no questions, I'd just like to read the last passage, which is very short. Is that all right with the audience?
There's someone there.
There is a question. I'm doing my doctorate. I'm writing my dissertation on the politics of displacement and cultural disarticulation of the Sonewal tribe in the Diamir area of Chilas, Gilgit-Baltistan. I'm doing my research there, but out of that is emerging a novel that I'm calling Mask, and it begins with an autopsy of a woman who has been shot in the head, and it goes back into the 9th century, which was the golden era of Buddhism in the area where I'm doing my research, and it involves the excommunication of a Buddhist monk who had lived in the area of Chilas, which is my research area, and whose soul keeps returning as history unfolds till the year 2007. It keeps returning into and enters different characters, all of whom are looking for salvation, which is nirvana in the Buddhist philosophy. The last incarnation of that particular soul is within the person who we don't know who he is, but we know that there was somebody who was responsible for the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. And so the autopsy is where the story starts, but it's also where it ends, because the notion behind the suicide bombings and suicide attacks is that the person committing these attacks will find salvation in Jannah, in the notion of paradise. So I'm looking back at how over history we have tried to find that salvation, and how salvation for some has meant bloodshed for others. So that's what I'm hoping to work on now.
Yes.
I write my scripts in Urdu because my films are made for a larger audience. I don't think I have the competence to write novels, because filmmaking is basically working with images. So my scripts involve dialogue, which are written obviously in the Urdu script, even if the dialogue is in another language. लेकिन इतनी मैं समझती हूँ कि महारत या उर्दू में
लेकिन पश्तो में तो ट्रांसलेट हुई है ये,
जी,
उर्दू में नहीं हुई?
उर्दू में नहीं हुई, नहीं,
पश्तो में हुई है ट्रांसलेट ये, और आई थिंक
फारसी में जो फारसी में इसको जिसका तर्जुमा कर रहे थे, ही वाज अनफॉर्चुनेटली assassinated in Peshawar by the Taliban, and for the fact that he was a Shia. And so, I've lost that.
I think Faryal will conclude with a short paragraph from the end of the book. Is it?
Yes, the character descends, the person whose diary this is, descends into madness himself. Yes.
Sorry, यहाँ कोई
आवाज़ नहीं आ रही आपकी?
जी, अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
अस्सलाम
ये जो मदरसे हैं जिनके मुतालिक आपने बुक में भी लिखा है और हम लोग भी हर वक्त सुनते रहते हैं, वहाँ से जो बच्चे निकलते हैं वो किस तरीके से हो जाते हैं, वो किस तरीके से ज़िंदगी गुजारते हैं और क्या हम पे गुजरती है, तो उन मदरसों में मुतालिक आपने कुछ सोचा? आपने बुक तो लिखी, मदरसे का जिक्र भी किया कि किस तरीके से एक बच्चे को संसार किया गया, लेकिन वो मौलवी या वो जो वहाँ पर पढ़ाने वाले हैं वो कहाँ से आते हैं, कहाँ उनकी ट्रेनिंग होती है, कहाँ उनको दीन के नाम पे तालीम दी जाती है, उसके मुतालिक आप लोगों ने कुछ काम किया?
देखिए जी, ये लिटरेरी फेस्टिवल में राइटर्स आर नॉट एक्सपेक्टेड टू टेक ऑन the state in ways other than with the weapons that they are armed with, which in this case is words. उसका असर जितना होता है उतना ही मैं उसकी तवक्को रख सकती हूँ, लेकिन ये आप मेरे ख्याल में किसी NGO के बानी को या किसी सियासतदान से पूछिए तो मुनासिब रहेगा।
मेरे ख्याल में लिटरेचर का काम यही होता है, अदब का या फिल्म का या थिएटर का, कि एक डिस्कोर्स आप शुरू करें, एक डिबेट आप शुरू करें, एक अवेयरनेस आप पैदा करें, जो क्रिएटिव राइटर होता है या आर्टिस्ट होता है, उसका ज़रूरी नहीं है कि वो उसका काम है जवाब देना. जवाब आप लोग दीजिए, सोचिए, और यही बहुत एक मेरे ख्याल में इट्स आई थिंक इट्स समथिंग ग्रेट कंट्रीब्यूशन इफ people in our country, artists and creative people, writers in our country can ask questions, and that we have the opportunity, like we are doing today, to discuss and to talk about these issues freely, without any fear of what the repercussions might be, which unfortunately is what is happening in this country today. I'm afraid that we don't have any time for any more questions. I think there's lunch.
One very short question. I'm really sorry, but
Ji.
how do we get to read your first book if it has been banned? How do we get to read that?
It
I
is-
think
it
you
is-
asked Oxford University Press to publish it.
Yes,
they
I
did
think
want to
that's-
publish.
Please,
They
publish
had
it.
wanted to publish it. It was already pledged to Penguin at that time. But now, when there's been a demand for this book, there's been a huge demand for the film. अमीना मुझे कहती हैं कि जी उनकी पॉलिसी बदल गई, अब वो फिक्शन नहीं छाप रहे, लेकिन मेरा नहीं
शायद
ख्याल कि ये
दोबारा-
फिक्शन है, ये हकीकत है. और आपकी मतलब आप प्रेशराइज कीजिए OUP को. They should make an exception.
Please do publish it, please. Thank you.
I'd like to end this, but just actually, I don't want to do any more reading. We started with some images. I'd like to end with images. This is a film, it's the last segment of the film that was based on some of the stories emerging out of my second novel. And it's made by one of my actors who you will recognize from the first film.
Now